Hi, everyone. My name is Erica, and today I'll be walking you through an exercise in generational narrative journalism that I've been embarking on for the past year or so. It's titled No Oblivion, Our Lost Years, and it aims to record some of the singular and collective peculiarities of the last few years. So let's set the scene where inspiration struck. I was studying abroad in London in 2022, and I took a day trip to Oxford with some of my friends to explore the city of literary fame. Of course, we had to check out some of the bookstores, but we came across something quite unusual. A bookshelf shelved completely with these old leather-bound classics that had entirely blank pages. We each wanted to serendipitously pick one, and I landed on the one pictured in the upper left. It's an old, waterlogged, cracking edition of In Memoriam, which is a collection of poems by Victorian poet laureate Lord Tennyson. Why did this book resonate with me? What did I have to grieve? And what did I feel the need to memorialize? Finding this book brought a conscious attention to some of these questions that had been brewing since the start of the pandemic about our generation and what recovery might look like for us. I just kept finding myself in this conversation with classmates and friends about the loss of expectations and the anger and resentment that had created. We talked about fears of a stilted coming of age in a time of uncertainty. Now, Tennyson's piece tackled so many of the same themes 170 years ago. Grief, personal and universal, seismic change, disruption, an era of questioning. All of these resonate in the early 2020s, and with the book in my hands. I couldn't help but notice these parallels. And I'll read an excerpt from my piece that was spurred by this Tennyson quote: "I am a part of all that I have met." I got to thinking about where I've left marks, and the marks left on me. How much of myself is my experiences, and how much of it is intrinsically my character? Does one create the other? In the months of lockdown, I started feeling like a sum of disjointed parts: a Zoom student, a grounded traveler, a daughter, a sister, an athlete without a sport, an abandoned friend, a heartbroken teenager, an avid reader who didn't read much because I could barely process my own world, let alone a fictional one. And some of that was equalizing. I was abroad in a BU program, which wasn't even an option for the class above me. Yes, COVID restrictions still dictated our day-to-day, but we were living with the rules instead of just surviving them. In Memoriam, worn and old and lovely, a famous work and a complete blank page, a sum of parts and an opportunity to write just some of this down. I've now completed a journalism minor at BU, so I've examined the process by which journalists record world-changing events, and a lot of it is formulaic. You're all familiar with these headlines. They dominated the media for years, and they had to. These were the stories that needed to be told. But they're not every story, and they're not holistically representative of the lived experience of the pandemic, of what it was like being a young adult when it struck, of having our college years interrupted, segmented, isolated. But I also think that our story is one of adapting, of learning to live with few guarantees, week to week, day to day, and minute to minute. I have two photos on the screen. The first is from March 11th, 2020, a bookstore in Montreal where I was on spring break with some of my college friends. Another serendipitous choice of literature, I took this photo of a quote by Sappho. It says, "No oblivion. Someone I tell you in another time will remember us." The second, some of you may recognize as the email in which we were informed that we would not be returning to BU's campus after spring break. 18 minutes between these two photos. 18 minutes between spontaneous international travel with college friends to the relative isolation of my childhood bedroom. 18 minutes for every one of my preconceived expectations to evaporate. And this is where the story really begins. So how to go about writing it? There are three main themes that I considered. First, a sense of reporting without a big picture, of not knowing what was going to be relevant in a week, but writing it down anyway. Then, stories of resilience, of overcoming, of coping, and doing what we can. And lastly, the reality of world events colliding with the personal. I'm Scottish and Ukrainian, and I was abroad studying international relations in a post-Brexit world where Scotland was seriously considering an independence referendum, and Ukraine was suffering a full-scale invasion. I had a lot of personal investment in the news headlines. And they all intersect in my piece. But let's zoom out for a second and reflect together on some of our last few years. I have some prompts. My 2020 was meeting college friends. My 2020 also was attending a Zoom funeral for one of my high school friends. My 2021 was getting the vaccine, seeing people again, a little bit of freedom. My 2021 also was new variants causing more lockdowns. My 2022 was studying in London, traveling. My 2022 was also watching bombs descend on Ukraine while I was working my political public affairs internship in Parliament. Both of these things are true. They're two sides to the same coin. I've included the start of my piece, and I'll read from about midway. I don't think any of us are the same perennials that went into dormancy, because 3 years ago to the day, I was halfway around the world in a French-Canadian bookstore where snow pelted the window and spring break beckoned the dawning of an unexpected season, one of cold, isolation, and the death of expectations. March of 2020 thrust all of us into a harsh winter that we didn't see coming. And for a lot of us, that unexpectedness, that loss of security, was the hardest part to reconcile. And I think that there's a spectrum when it comes to approaching the future. There's entitlement, which we should not have. There's expectations, which we often do have, but they need to be adaptable. And then there's hope, which is the one that we can't afford to lose. I went back to Montreal 3 years later to that exact same bookstore, but everything had changed for me. And I'm grateful for who I was then and for who I am now standing in front of you. Because although there may not be guarantees about what our stories will look like, as long as we're here to tell them, there will be stories of resilience for our generation and for the next who need it. Thank you. I can take any questions.
Wonderful presentation to begin with. One thing I was curious, after you're done wrapping up this project, and like from the methods that you used, how do you think you're going, like, will you continue using the same methods to document your life in the future? Or do you think that there's anything that you would change in the way that you started collecting your ideas and photos and little pieces of literature as well?
I had the wonderful fortune of speaking with a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist recently, and we compared notes on how we tackle projects that are years in the making. And the common theme for all of us seems to be a lot of sticky notes, and I do think I'll be implementing that forward because it helps organize and reorganize kind of on the fly. But generally speaking, going forward, this is a kind of project that I don't see immediate replication for. It's very timely. It's set in a specific set of circumstances. But I can apply a lot of what I learned about how I work under pressure or how I connect things over the course of years to other projects. But I think this one will probably be a little unique. Thank you for your question.
I loved the presentation and such a cool project. One question I had, kind of along the same lines, but in regards to the style of your piece and like the narrative style, is there any like particular works that you had read like before starting the project or thinking about it that sort of led you to choose this method of storytelling? Was it more like books you had read or like articles, or where did that kind of come from?
Absolutely. I took a lot of cues from long-form journalistic narratives, particularly ones in The Atlantic. The journalist I had just referenced, she wrote an amazing piece. Her name is Jennifer Senior. It was somewhere around 13,000 words in block style, and it cataloged about 20 years of personal experience. So that I read over and over and took notes from how to kind of collect that much data, personal and not personal. So I would say that that was a huge inspiration. I think that any piece that tries to tackle something that can't be nailed down in a few paragraphs, you need to have a different formatting for, which is where block style journalism comes from, where you have seemingly unrelated topics that are connected by large themes. And that's what I tried to replicate with this piece.
Any more questions? All right, thank you very much, Erica.
Thank you.